The apartment in Chiang Mai was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioner, a sound Richard had grown to hate because it reminded him of all the other silences. On the kitchen counter sat an envelope containing 400 baht, still sealed, dated from 3 days ago. Beside it, a single piece of paper with handwriting he had memorized during their 6 months together. Thank you for everything. You are good, man. I have to go home now. Take care. Naree. 12 words. 6 months reduced to 12 words in careful English, the letters rounded and childlike, each one probably taking her minutes to form correctly. She had left while he was at the immigration office renewing his visa, taking only her clothes and the small gold bracelet he had bought her in their second week together. She left behind the rice cooker, the smartphone he had given her, the collection of skincare products that had slowly accumulated in the bathroom. She left behind everything that would remind him she had been real. Richard was 61 years old, and he had believed genuinely, desperately believed that Naree loved him. Not because of the 400 baht he gave her every morning in an envelope marked with that day's date. Not because he paid her rent and bought her food and sent money to her family in Udon Thani. He believed she loved him because of how she touched his face in the morning, because of how she laughed at his terrible Thai pronunciation, because of how she curled against him at night as if his body were home. But now she was gone. And the only thing left was this note, and the dawning realization that he had purchased something he mistook for love, purchased it at the rate of 400 baht per day, approximately 13 US dollars, the exact amount she had been earning as a waitress before they met. To understand how Richard arrived at this empty apartment clutching a goodbye note, we must go back 7 months to the moment when a divorced Australian electrician stepped off a plane in Bangkok carrying 2 suitcases and a heart so desperate for warmth that he could not see the difference between affection and transaction, between kindness and survival. This is a story about loneliness disguised as love, about how poverty creates performances so convincing that even the performers begin to believe them, about the quiet violence of economic desperation dressed in the language of romance. This is a story about two people who needed different things from each other and called that need by the same name until the day the money stopped and the illusion shattered. Richard Collins had spent 38 years as an electrician in Perth, waking before dawn to wire houses in suburbs that all looked the same, coming home to a wife who had stopped seeing him somewhere around year 15. Their divorce was neither dramatic nor particularly painful, just a slow acknowledgement that they had become strangers who shared a mortgage. When they sold the house and split the proceeds, Richard found himself at 61 with approximately 180,000 Australian dollars, no job, and no particular reason to stay in a country where winter made his joints ache and where he had become invisible to women decades earlier. Thailand had always existed in his imagination as a place of warmth, not just weather but emotional warmth, where Western men were valued rather than ignored, where age was respected rather than pitied, where a modest pension could purchase not just comfort but possibility. He had read the blogs and watched the videos, absorbed the stories of retired men who had found happiness in Chiang Mai and Pattaya and Bangkok, men who posted photos of themselves with beautiful Thai women, 30 years younger, all claiming they had finally found real love after the coldness of Western relationships. Richard wanted to believe these stories because he needed them to be true. The alternative that he would spend the rest of his life alone, irrelevant, aging in a studio apartment where no one knew his name felt like a death sentence. So he boarded a plane to Bangkok with a 3-month tourist visa and a plan that was more hope than strategy. He would find a small apartment, learn basic Thai, immerse himself in the culture, and perhaps if he was fortunate, meet someone who could make his remaining years feel less like an ending and more like an unexpected beginning. The Bangkok heat hit him like stepping into breath itself, thick and alive and inescapable. The city overwhelmed him immediately. The traffic that moved like a living organism, the street vendors shouting in Thai, the temples that appeared between modern buildings like time had folded in on itself. Everything smelled of fish, sauce, and incense and exhaust fumes, a combination that was both repulsive and intoxicating. He stayed in Khao San Road for his first week, in a guest house where other Western men gathered in the evenings to drink beer and share advice. Most were younger than Richard, teaching English or working remotely, but a few were his age or older, retired men who spoke casually about their Thai girlfriends, about how much cheaper and simpler life was here, about how Thai women appreciated good men in ways Western women no longer did. These conversations made Richard uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite articulate. There was something transactional in how they spoke about their relationships, something that reduced love to a cost-benefit analysis. But he was also envious, because these men seemed happy, seemed to have found what he was searching for. In Thai culture, many of us have learned to read the needs of foreign men before they speak them aloud. We see the loneliness in how they sit alone at bars, the desperation in how quickly they smile at any woman who shows interest, the vulnerability in how they talk about their lives back home as if confessing sins. We understand that many come here not seeking Thailand, but seeking escape from lives that stopped working, from countries where they became ghosts, from the particular cruelty of aging as an invisible man. This understanding is both compassion and strategy. We know what they need, and we know that need can be converted into survival for ourselves and our families. Richard moved to Chiang Mai after 2 weeks in Bangkok. The northern city felt more manageable, less chaotic, with its ancient temples and night markets and the relaxed pace of a place where tourists came to breathe rather than consume. He rented a one-bedroom apartment in the Nimman Haimin area for 12,000 baht per month, about $360, a space that would have cost 3 times that amount in Perth and would have been half the size. He established routines quickly, the way lonely people do when routine becomes a substitute for purpose. Morning coffee at a cafe where the staff learned to prepare his flat white without asking. Afternoon walks through the old city. Photographing temples he would never enter because he felt like an intruder in other people's sacred spaces. Evening meals at small restaurants where he struggled through Thai phrases and felt proud when he successfully ordered without pointing at the menu. It was at one of these restaurants, a modest place, with plastic chairs and fluorescent lighting, that he met Naree. She was his waitress, moving between tables with the graceful efficiency of someone who had done this work for years. She was small, even by Thai standards, with long black hair pulled back in a ponytail and a face that seemed young until you looked closely at her eyes. Her eyes were tired, carrying weight that 27 years shouldn't bear. Richard ordered Pad Krapao Mu, stumbling over the pronunciation. Naree smiled, not the bright, performative smile he had seen in tourist areas, but something smaller, more genuine. She corrected his tone gently, repeating the phrase slowly so he could learn. When she brought his food, she asked in careful English where he was from, how long he had been in Chiang Mai, if he was enjoying Thailand. These were standard questions that service workers ask foreign customers, but Richard heard them as personal interest. When she laughed at his attempt to say very delicious in Thai, his tone so wrong that he had actually said something closer to very smelly, he felt a warmth in his chest that had been absent for years. He returned to that restaurant the next evening, and the evening after that. By the fourth visit, Naree would smile when she saw him enter, would bring him water before he asked, would sit at his table for a few minutes during slow periods to help him practice Thai phrases. She told him she was from Udon Thani in Aisan, that she sent money home to her parents every month, that she had worked in Chiang Mai for 3 years. She didn't tell him about the 2 years before that, working in a bar in Pattaya where her job had included more than serving drinks. She didn't tell him about the Australian man who had promised to marry her and then disappeared back to Sydney without warning. She didn't tell him about the debt her family had accumulated when her father's motorbike accident left him unable to work, about the monthly interest that kept growing no matter how much she sent home. In Thailand, we learn early that our personal tragedies are not interesting to others. They are commonplace, part of the background noise of poverty that surrounds us. We learn to present only the palatable version of ourselves, the story that invites sympathy without demanding too much emotional labor from the listener. Naree had perfected this art. She was the dutiful daughter supporting her family, the hardworking waitress navigating life in the city, the sweet girl who laughed easily and asked gentle questions. The darker chapters of her story remained unspoken, protected behind the smile she had trained herself to maintain, regardless of what she felt inside. After 2 weeks of daily visits to the restaurant, Richard asked Naree if she would meet him for dinner on her day off. She hesitated not because she didn't want to, but because she was calculating whether this man was serious or simply another foreigner seeking temporary entertainment. She had learned to read these distinctions quickly. The serious ones talked about how long they planned to stay in Thailand, asked about her family, made plans that extended beyond the next day. Richard showed all the signs of being serious, so she agreed. Their first date was at a nicer restaurant than where she worked. The kind of place with cloth napkins and menus that didn't have pictures. Richard was nervous, talking too much about his life in Perth, his work as an electrician, his divorce, his children who rarely called. Naree listened with the attention we Thai women learn to give men, not interrupting, asking small questions, showing interest in stories we've heard versions of many times before from many different foreign men seeking the same thing Richard was seeking. When the bill came 1,800 baht, more than Naree earned in 4 days of work, Richard paid without hesitation and without making a performance of his generosity. This small detail registered with Naree. Some foreign men paid but wanted you to acknowledge the sacrifice, to express effusive gratitude that reminded you constantly of the imbalance. Richard simply paid, as if this was natural, expected, not worthy of comment. After dinner, they walked through the Sunday walking street market, weaving between vendors, selling handmade crafts, and tourists taking photos. Richard bought her a small silk scarf, 300 baht. The vendor had asked for 500, but Naree had negotiated in Thai while Richard stood beside her, pleased by this small moment of partnership. He didn't try to kiss her that night. He didn't invite himself to her apartment or ask her to come to his. He simply thanked her for the evening, said he had enjoyed her company very much, and asked if she would like to meet again. This restraint, this absence of immediate expectation for physical intimacy made Naree cautiously hopeful that perhaps this man was different from the others. They saw each other 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. Coffee, lunch, an evening watching the sunset from Doi Suthep Temple, another dinner. Richard was patient, gentle, increasingly affectionate but never pushy. He held her hand while walking. He touched her hair softly when they sat together. He looked at her like she was something precious rather than something purchased. On their 5th date, Naree invited him to her apartment, a studio room in an old building where the walls were thin and the bathroom mold never quite disappeared, despite her constant cleaning. Richard didn't comment on the poverty of her living situation. He simply sat on her single chair while she prepared tea, and when she joined him, sitting on the edge of her bed because there was nowhere else to sit, he kissed her for the first time. The physical intimacy that followed was tender in a way that surprised Naree. She had been with many men, some paid directly, some paid indirectly through gifts and dinners and rent money, and most treated sex as a transaction to be completed efficiently. But Richard took his time, seemed more concerned with her pleasure than his own, held her afterward like she mattered beyond the function her body had just served. When she told him the next morning that she needed to get to work, her shift started at 11, Richard asked her how much she earned. This question should have felt intrusive, but his tone was gentle, curious, rather than judgmental. 400 baht per day, she told him. Sometimes more with tips, sometimes less on slow days. About 12,000 baht per month, barely enough to pay rent and send money home and eat and survive. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he made his offer. Richard's proposal was simple. He would give Naree 400 baht every day, exactly what she earned at the restaurant, if she would quit her job. and spend her time with him instead. Not as a formal employee, he emphasized, but as his girlfriend, his partner, someone who could help him navigate Thailand, teach him the language, share meals and experiences and daily life with him. Naree sat very still, processing this offer. In her 3 years in Chiang Mai and 2 years before that in Pattaya, she had encountered many arrangements. Some men paid directly for specific services. Some men provided monthly allowances in exchange for regular company. Some men paid rent and bought food and sent money for emergencies that were never quite emergencies. But this was different. This was explicit, structured, honest about the economic foundation while still maintaining the language of relationship. She asked him what he expected from her. Richard's answer was both reassuring and somehow sad. Companionship, affection, someone to share his days with, someone who would genuinely care about him. He said he wasn't trying to buy a wife, but he understood that she needed financial security to have the freedom to build a real relationship. The 400 baht was simply removing the barrier that would otherwise keep them apart, her need to work 14 hours a day, too exhausted for anything resembling romance. Naree agreed, but not for the reasons Richard believed. She didn't agree because she saw potential for love. She had stopped believing in love somewhere between Pattaya and the accumulating debt her family couldn't escape. She agreed because 400 baht per day from one man was safer and easier than 400 baht per day earned through serving food to dozens of customers, standing on her feet until they swelled, breathing kitchen heat that made her dizzy. She agreed because Richard seemed kind, unlikely to be violent or demanding, unlikely to disappear without warning the way the Australian man had disappeared from Pattaya. She agreed because this was survival dressed in gentle language, and she had learned that survival requires you to accept whatever form it takes. In Thai culture, particularly among those of us from Isan, the poorest region, where drought and debt have defined generations, we understand that love is a luxury that comes after security, not before. We are taught to be practical, to assess situations through the lens of survival rather than romance. When a foreign man offers financial stability, we calculate quickly. Is he dangerous? Is he reliable? Is this arrangement sustainable? If the answers satisfy our risk assessment, we proceed knowing that affection might grow over time but is not required at the beginning. This isn't cynicism, this is the mathematics of poverty. The cold calculus that emerges when every decision determines whether your family eats or goes hungry. The envelope ritual began the next morning. Richard had gone to a stationery shop and purchased a box of small manila envelopes. Each morning, he would count out 400 baht, usually two 100 baht notes and 450 baht notes, and place them in an envelope. He would write the date on the envelope in his careful handwriting, then present it to Naree with her morning coffee. This ritual felt important to Richard. It created structure, formalized their arrangement in a way that felt businesslike and therefore respectable. He wasn't just giving her money haphazardly, he was fulfilling his part of their agreement with consistency and care. For Naree, the envelope ritual felt both reassuring and imprisoning. Reassuring because it meant Richard was reliable, that the money would appear every day without her needing to ask or remind or perform gratitude. Imprisoning because each envelope was a small reminder that she was here through contract rather than choice, that her presence in his life had a specific daily value, that if she somehow failed to be worth 400 baht, the envelopes might stop appearing. But she didn't share these feelings with Richard. Instead, she accepted each envelope with a smile and a kiss, tucking it into her purse where it joined the others, saving money in a way she had never been able to do when every baht had to be immediately spent on rent or food or money sent home. Their days developed a rhythm. Naree would wake first, make coffee using the expensive machine Richard had purchased, prepare simple breakfast, usually fruit and toast, sometimes rice porridge when Richard wanted to try Thai breakfast. They would eat together while Richard practiced Thai phrases from his language app, Naree gently correcting his pronunciation, both of them laughing when his tones went so wrong that he said something accidentally vulgar. Mornings were often spent at cafes or walking through markets. Richard wanted to see everything, experience everything, and Naree became his guide. She showed him which fruit vendors had the sweetest mangoes, which temples welcomed visitors most warmly, which neighborhoods to avoid after dark. She taught him how to bargain politely, how to greet people with the right level of formality, how to eat sticky rice with his hands without making a mess. Afternoons, they would return to Richard's apartment, larger than Naree's studio, with air conditioning that actually worked and hot water that never ran out. Richard would read or work on his laptop, managing the remnants of his life in Australia remotely. Naree would watch Thai dramas on her phone, occasionally sending money to her family through banking apps, the accumulated envelopes slowly becoming a buffer against the constant financial emergencies that define her family's existence. Evenings were for cooking together, for intimacy that felt increasingly routine, for sitting on the balcony, watching the city lights while Richard talked about his past and Naree listened with the attention that had become her primary currency. To outsiders, they looked like any couple navigating the early stages of relationship. Richard would hold her hand at markets, kiss her forehead when they parted temporarily, speak about her to other expats he met with genuine affection. Naree would smile at his jokes, lean against him naturally, perform the small gestures of intimacy that relationships require. But beneath this surface, the structure remained. 400 baht per day, deposited in an envelope, accepted with a smile, saved or sent home or spent according to Naree's needs. The structure was always there, humming beneath their interactions like the air conditioner Richard had grown to hate, constant, artificial, maintaining a climate that felt real only because neither of them acknowledged the machinery making it possible. 3 months into their arrangement, Richard began to use the word love. Not casually, but with the weight of belief, the way people speak sacred truths. He would say it in moments of intimacy, whisper it when holding her close, include it in his messages when they were apart. I love you, Naree. I love you so much. Naree would respond with the Thai phrase, Chan Rak Hun, but the words felt like translation rather than truth, like she was speaking a language she had learned phonetically without understanding its deeper meaning. She cared for Richard in the way you care for someone who is kind to you, who makes your life easier, who doesn't hurt you. But love the kind of love that exists independent of circumstance, that would survive if the circumstances changed. She didn't feel that. She didn't examine this absence too closely. Examining it would require acknowledging that she was performing a role, and that acknowledgement would make the performance harder to sustain. So instead, she focused on the small kindnesses Richard showed her, the ways he was better than other men she had known, the reality that this arrangement had given her breathing room in a life that had felt like drowning. Richard introduced her to other expats. He had befriended retired men and their Thai partners, younger digital nomads with their girlfriends, a small community of foreigners who had made Chiang Mai their home. These gatherings made Naree uncomfortable because she could see herself reflected in the other Thai women present. They all shared a certain watchfulness, a careful attention to their partner's moods, a practiced cheerfulness that intensified whenever money or plans or future commitments were discussed. There was one woman, Porn, 32, partnered with a German man named Klaus, who caught Naree's eye at a dinner party. While the foreign men talked among themselves about visas and property laws, Porn and Naree stood together near the kitchen, speaking Thai in the rapid, unguarded way we speak our mother tongue, when finally released from the labor of English. How long have you been with the Australian? Porn asked. 3 months. He seems kind. He is kind. Does he give you enough? The question was direct, practical, stripped of romance. This was the real question, the one that mattered beneath all the performance. Naree told her about the 400 baht per day. Porn nodded slowly. That's reasonable. Klaus gives me 20,000 per month, but I also clean his house and cook all meals. Sometimes I think the daily amount is better. You can count it, watch it accumulate. Monthly amounts can disappear too easily, and then you don't remember where it went. They were quiet for a moment. both understanding what they were, survival artists, women who had learned to transform loneliness into currency, who exchanged the performance of affection for the reality of security. Neither judged the other because judgment required the luxury of alternatives, and neither had alternatives that didn't involve the same careful navigation of foreign men's needs. In Thai culture, especially among women from Aizan who work in the informal economy of foreign relationships, we have developed our own support networks and wisdom. We share information about which men are generous or cruel, which ones keep promises or disappear, which arrangements are sustainable or exploitative. We don't speak about this openly. It would violate the fiction that these are love relationships rather than economic partnerships. But among ourselves, we acknowledge the reality. We are working even if our work is called dating or marriage. We are supporting families back home even if our method is called affection. This shared understanding creates solidarity, a sisterhood born not of choice but of common circumstance. In his 5th month with Naree, Richard decided to test her love. This idea came from an expat forum he had been reading, where men debated how to determine whether their Thai partners genuinely loved them or were simply staying for financial benefit. The consensus was that you needed to create a situation where money became uncertain, not cruelty, but a test of commitment. Richard told himself this was reasonable, even necessary. He wanted to believe that what he and Naree shared transcended economics, that she would stay with him even if the daily envelopes disappeared, that their relationship was real, in the way relationships are supposed to be real. So one morning, he didn't prepare the envelope. When Naree came to the kitchen expecting her coffee and the envelope marked with that day's date, Richard was sitting at the table looking serious. He told her he needed to talk about their arrangement. He said he had been thinking about how the daily money might be creating an artificial dynamic, preventing genuine feelings from developing naturally. He suggested they try a month without the envelopes, just living together as a normal couple, and see how it felt. He would still pay for food and rent and shared expenses, but the 400 baht per day would stop temporarily. As he spoke, Richard watched Naree's face, looking for the reaction that would reveal her true feelings. But her face remained carefully neutral, the mask we Thai women learn to maintain when navigating dangerous conversational territory. Naree understood immediately what was happening. This was a test, the kind of test foreign men create when they confuse control with love, when they need to prove that affection can be separated from its material conditions. She had seen this before in Pattaya, had watched other women fail these tests and lose their positions, replaced by younger women who hadn't yet learned to recognize the trap. She could have explained to Richard that his test was false, that asking her to prove love by removing security was like asking someone to prove they can swim by removing water. She could have told him that the 400 baht wasn't preventing genuine feelings, it was creating the foundation that made any feelings possible, that love built on hunger and fear isn't love at all, but desperate dependence. But she didn't say any of this. Instead, she smiled and agreed, saying she understood that she welcomed the chance to show their relationship was real beyond the money. That night, alone in her old studio apartment that she had kept, despite spending every night at Richard's place, her safety net, her escape route maintained at cost, she couldn't really afford Naree-made calculations. She had saved approximately 30,000 baht from the daily envelopes after sending money home to her family. This was enough for perhaps 2 months of survival, if she was extremely careful. Longer if she found work again, though returning to restaurant work after 5 months away would feel like regression, like erasure of the small progress she had made. She thought about Richard's test and what it revealed about him, the insecurity that needed proving, the inability to understand that poverty changes how love functions, the assumption that she should gamble her security to validate his emotions. She thought about Klaus and porn, about all the other Thai women navigating similar arrangements, about whether any of them had ever passed these tests or whether the tests were designed to be failed, creating justification for whatever ending the foreign man had already decided upon. In Thai Buddhism, we learn about attachment and impermanence. about how suffering comes from clinging to things that are inherently temporary. Naree wasn't particularly religious, but these concepts had seeped into her worldview nonetheless. She understood that Richard was temporary, that this arrangement was temporary, that everything was temporary except the obligation to survive and protect her family. The question wasn't whether to leave, but when to leave and how to do so without destroying the fragile dignity she had managed to preserve. Naree lasted 3 weeks without the envelopes. She continued coming to Richard's apartment, cooking his meals, sharing his bed, performing the role of devoted girlfriend. But something had shifted that couldn't be shifted back. The ease between them had been replaced by a watchfulness on both sides. Richard watching to see if she would prove her love by staying without payment, Naree watching to see if this test would end or if this was the new permanent reality. Richard noticed the change but misinterpreted it. He thought she was hurt by his test, and her hurt proved her feelings were genuine. He didn't see the calculations behind her careful smile. The way she had begun organizing her belongings into categories of what to take and what to leave behind, the increasing frequency of her phone calls home conducted in rapid Thai he couldn't understand. On day 22 of the test, Naree's mother called. Her father had fallen again, the old motorcycle accident injury flaring up, and he needed treatment they couldn't afford. The cost was 18,000 baht, more than Naree had saved, more than she could access without asking Richard for money, which would mean admitting the test had revealed exactly what it was designed to reveal, that she stayed because of financial necessity rather than transcendent love. That evening, she told Richard her father was sick, that she needed to send money home. Richard's face showed immediate concern, but also something else, a flicker of vindication, as if her request proved what he had suspected. Still, he transferred 15,000 baht to her account, saying her family's health was important, that of course he would help. But the damage was done. Naree saw in his expression that he viewed her request as failure, as proof that she was with him for money rather than love. And Richard saw in her desperation that she had been performing all along, that the relationship he thought they had built was a carefully maintained fiction. Neither spoke these realizations aloud. Instead, they continued the performance for 3 more days, their interactions becoming increasingly strained, the space between them filling with unspoken resentments and misunderstandings. On the 4th day, while Richard was at immigration extending his visa, a task that would take most of the day, involving lines and bureaucracy and patience, Naree packed her belongings quickly. She took her clothes, the toiletries she had purchased herself, the small collection of items that were undeniably hers. She left behind the smartphone Richard had bought, the jewelry he had given her, the expensive skincare products she had gradually accumulated. She left behind anything that could be construed as his property rather than hers. On the kitchen counter, beside the stack of empty envelopes Richard had never thrown away, she placed a note written in her careful English, each letter taking minutes to form correctly. 12 words that were both inadequate and complete, that said everything and nothing about their 5 months together. Then she took a song few to the bus station and bought a ticket back to Udon Thani, back to the Aizen province, where poverty was familiar and expectations were scaled to reality, back to her family who needed her, not as a girlfriend or a partner, but as a daughter who sent money, who survived by whatever means necessary, who had learned that love in the abstract doesn't feed anyone. 3 days after Naree left, Richard sat in his apartment staring at the note she had left, trying to understand where the relationship had gone wrong. He had been kind to her, generous, patient. He had offered her security and affection and the chance to rest from years of brutal work. He had genuinely cared for her, had said, "I love you," and meant it each time. The 400 baht envelope still sat in their box, several days' worth prepared in advance that would never be delivered. Richard calculated what he had spent over 5 months. Approximately 60,000 baht plus rent assistance, food, gifts, the money he had sent for her father's treatment. In total, perhaps 90,000 baht, about $2,700 US. Less than he had spent on his divorce lawyer, less than he used to spend on monthly expenses back in Perth. For this modest sum, he had believed he had found companionship, affection, perhaps even love. But now he saw that what he had purchased was a performance so skillful that even the performer had sometimes believed it, a fiction maintained by daily payments that transformed loneliness into something that resembled relationship. Other expats he spoke with had mixed reactions. Some said he had been foolish to test her, that obviously stopping the money would drive her away. What did he expect? Others said he was lucky to discover her true nature before investing more time and money, that Thai women from Aizen were notoriously pragmatic, that the mistake was believing any of them stayed for reasons beyond economics. Both perspectives missed the point. Naree hadn't deceived him. She had been exactly what she appeared to be. A woman who needed financial stability and was willing to provide companionship and affection in exchange. The deception was Richard's. The lie he told himself that 400 baht per day could purchase something that existed independent of those daily payments. That affection born of economic necessity could transform into love that transcended economic reality. In a drawer of his desk, Richard kept the note Naree had left. Sometimes he would read it, analyzing the 12 words as if they contained hidden meaning, as if understanding them would help him understand where his dream of Thai paradise had collapsed into this quiet loneliness. What he never understood was that Naree had been kind to him within the constraints of their arrangement. She had cooked meals with care, had laughed genuinely at his attempts to speak Thai, had shared her body with more tenderness than the transaction required. She had given him 5 months of companionship that made his days feel less empty, that provided structure and warmth and the illusion of being love. The 400 baht per day wasn't buying love, it was buying the space where affection could potentially grow, where survival didn't prevent gentleness, where Naree could rest enough to be kind. When Richard removed that foundation through his test, he destroyed the only conditions under which their relationship could exist. Back in Udon Thani, Naree returned to the grinding reality of ease and poverty. She found work at a local restaurant, earning less than she had earned in Chiang Mai, sent money to her family from a pool that was always insufficient, tried not to think too much about the 5 months when she had experienced rest. She didn't regret leaving. The test Richard had imposed revealed that his love was conditional in ways that made it indistinguishable from business arrangement, except business arrangements usually honor their terms, rather than changing them arbitrarily to prove a point. Sometimes, late at night, she would think about Richard's face when he said he loved her, the genuine emotion there that she hadn't been able to return. She felt something like guilt for not loving him back, for failing to transform survival instinct into romantic feeling. But mostly she felt tired, the kind of tired that comes from performing affection you don't feel, from carrying the weight of other people's expectations, from navigating a world where your value is measured in daily increments of 400 baht. For foreign men who come to Thailand seeking the warmth that has disappeared from their lives in the West, Richard's story offers uncomfortable lessons. The companionship available here is real within its economic context. Thai women will care for you, cook for you, share your bed with affection that is genuine, even if not romantic, make your daily life easier and warmer and less lonely. But this companionship requires continuous investment, not as a flaw in Thai character, but as a reality of economic desperation that shapes possibility. The mistake isn't in the transaction itself, but in believing the transaction can be transcended while maintaining its benefits, that you can remove the economic foundation while expecting the emotional structure to remain standing. Love that grows from security is still love, but it's love that requires security to survive. Remove the security through tests or changing circumstances, and the love disappears not because it was false, but because it was conditional on factors you chose to eliminate. Richard remained in Chiang Mai for 3 more months after Naree left. But the city felt different now, less like paradise and more like a place where loneliness was dressed in warmer weather. He met other Thai women through dating apps and at expat gatherings, women who smiled at him with practiced warmth and asked gentle questions about his life. But he could see the transaction now. could recognize the performance because he had lived inside it for 5 months, could identify the careful assessment behind every laugh and touch. Eventually, he returned to Perth, to the gray skies and the cold winds and the invisibility he had tried to escape. He told friends that Thailand had been interesting but ultimately not for him, that cultural differences were harder to navigate than he expected, that he preferred being closer to his children even though they rarely called. He didn't tell them about Naree, about the 400 baht envelopes, about how he had believed for 5 months that loneliness could be solved through daily payments in kindness and the willingness to ignore the mathematics underneath. He didn't tell them about the note he still kept in his desk drawer, 12 words in careful handwriting that represented both gratitude and goodbye, both acknowledgement and ending. Some illusions are comforting enough that we choose to live inside them, knowing they're illusions but preferring the beautiful lie to the ugly truth. Richard had lived inside such an illusion, and it had given him 5 months of warmth and companionship and the feeling of being valued. That it ended badly doesn't erase that it existed. That for a brief period, two people with vastly different needs found an arrangement that worked until the moment it stopped working. In the economics of intimacy, this is perhaps the best outcome available. Temporary connection built on honest transaction. Kindness exchanged for security, affection that exists within defined parameters rather than claiming to transcend them. It's not the love story Richard hoped for when he boarded the plane to Bangkok, but it was more than the loneliness he left behind in Perth. And for Naree, the 5 months represented survival in a form that was gentler than alternatives she had known. Money saved that helped her family, rest during a period when rest had seemed impossible. That it ended with a test she refused to fail, refused to destroy her survival for the sake of Richard's emotional validation showed strength rather than betrayal. In the end, the 400 baht per day purchased exactly what both parties understood it would purchase. Nothing more and nothing less. The tragedy wasn't in the transaction, but in Richard's belief that the transaction could become something else, that economic necessity could transform into romantic devotion through the alchemy of daily envelopes and careful kindness. The apartment in Chiang Mai stayed empty for several weeks before Richard finally surrendered the lease. The landlord found a box of prepared envelopes in the kitchen, each one marked with a date that had never arrived, each one containing 400 baht, meant for a woman who was gone. He counted the money 1,600 baht, 4 days' worth, and pocketed it as abandoned property, having no idea what the envelopes represented or why someone would prepare money in such a strange, ritualized way. The envelopes were thrown away. The note eventually lost or forgotten. The story dissolved into the background of similar stories: foreign men seeking warmth in Thailand, Thai women seeking survival through foreign men, both parties creating temporary fictions that felt real enough to sustain for months or years, until reality reasserted itself and the fiction collapsed under the weight of unmet expectations and incompatible needs. This is how intimacy becomes business in Thailand, not through malice or deception, but through the simple mathematics of poverty meeting loneliness, need meeting need survival, dressed in the language of affection, until someone tests whether the affection can exist without the survival mechanism, and the answer is always no. It cannot. It never could. If you found truth in this story, if it helped you see beyond the romantic narratives to the more complex reality of cross-cultural relationships built on economic foundations, I invite you to subscribe. There are more stories like this, stories about what happens when loneliness mistakes transaction for love, when survival performs affection, when two people need different things but call those needs by the same name. Thank you for listening.